All right, now let's get to the Miami Dolphins football talk, unfortunately, but also not unfortunately at the same time. Some positive news for the Miami Dolphins. They finally got their guy of the future, finally got their new GM, Jon-Eric Sullivan, assistant VP of player personnel, player operations for the Green Bay Packers. And it's honestly, a promising hire. No matter who they hired, I would have said it's probably a promising hire, if I'm being honest, because anything's better than Chris Greer and what we had before, and finally getting the trash out of town. But this is something that is actually a fresh start, which I like. Which was something the Miami Dolphins were going for, of course. Jon-Eric Sullivan comes from the Green Bay Packers. He is much like Chris Greer. Even though that does sound bad, it's not. Once I explain, he's much like Chris Greer. He's been in the Packers organizations since an intern, a little intern in 2003, and that's great when it's about the Green Bay Packers, because the Green Bay Packers have been a winning organization. Unlike the Miami Dolphins, you got a guy that's been there since 2001, since they haven't won a playoff game, and you're bringing him up as the GM. That's just shit. That's a shit show. But the Packers, on the other hand, good organization, winning organization, and an organization known for building through the draft. I mean, the Packers, besides Micah Parsons just this season, they're not really known for going out and trading for someone big. They build through the draft. And that's something the Miami Dolphins wanted to put an emphasis on in this GM search. Getting a guy that has a great scouting background and can build through the draft, most importantly, because the Miami Dolphins with Chris Greer, when we did have success, it was through trading, through signing these free agents, these big guys to big contracts, and look how that worked out. We're in cap hell right now, and we're left with a 7-10 team. That didn't work out. So that you have to build through the draft. You got to hit on your first round, second round, third round, fourth round, every single one of those picks. You got to hit on a majority of them. And he comes from a tree of, how we have the Shanahan tree with the head coaches, and Shanahan, he come all McVay's and Kyle Shanahan, McDaniel, Saleh, all those guys. Shula is now an extension. They all come from the Shanahan tree. Well, Jon-Eric Sullivan, the new GM of the Miami Dolphins, the new hire, he comes from a tree of GMs. John Dorsey is part of this tree. He is the former GM of the scouting, former GM of the Chiefs and Browns. He comes from John Schneider, who's the current GM of the Seahawks. The current GM of the Packers, like Brian something, I cannot pronounce that last name. Alonzo Highsmith, he's the executive player personnel with the New England Patriots. Those are all successful words. So this is kind of like the GM tree of the NFL, and he comes from that tree. So hopefully he is able to be successful as these other guys that he comes from is around, and is able to build some success in Miami and show some promise and build through the draft, which it seems like successful teams, that's how they win, hitting on their draft picks. And honestly, first I want to play some audio here of him talking about the importance of the draft.
Yeah, I think I've always been taught that the draft is your lifeblood, if you will. You build through the draft. It's a young man's game. You want to make sure that you're acquiring young, talented players that fit your culture. I think you supplement through free agency. You look at what Ron did with Reggie White, what Ted did with Charles Woodson. I think those are dangerous waters to tread in all the time, because typically teams aren't moving on from good players that are healthy and good in the locker room. They're trying to keep those themselves. But I think you got to build through the draft. I think you supplement free agency. I think you always have to be assessing your quarterback situation, making sure you have a trigger man that you can win with. And I think that you have to identify your core players within your team at all levels, your difference makers, your starters, your role guys, and the guys that are really good within their role and fit your culture. I think you have to do everything in your possibility to retain those players and make sure that you're keeping that together so that you can have sustained success over time.
Within that 1 minute audio clip, you hear everything you want to hear as a Miami Dolphins fan. Build through the draft, move on from the players when it's time to move on to players. Don't wait too long to move on from them, and assess your quarterback. Something we haven't had a winning quarterback in God knows who since Dan Marino. And we are coming from a regime, this is a transition from a regime, the Chris Greer era of the Miami Dolphins, where he either held on for these guys too long, or he was trying to sign free agents and trade up, and give away our assets instead of using our assets, draft picks, draft capital to get all these players and using the draft as your primary source and your primary player pool rather than free agency and trades, where this guy is using free agency and trade to supplement positions of need, which is everything you want to hear and more. Now, the only thing is, as I said before this, do not fall for the trap of giving so much hope for this guy. Look, this guy seems like a great hire. He comes from a successful tree of GMs. He comes from a winning organization since 2003. Look, you want to have the hope. You want to just relax. Just relax. Do not get hung up on who this guy takes in the draft. It may be a hit. It may not be a hit. It's his first year. Do not get hung up in all the free agency moves he makes and say this is going to be the next big move. This guy is going to make an impact. He's going to be bigger than when he was on his previous team. Do not get hung up in that. Wait till you see how we look on the field after year one or during year one. Then you can make an assessment. But you also got to analyze it fairly when the season comes on later. You got to think this guy's taking over a shit situation. It's his first year. This is his first year with his players, with his crew. Look at Mario Cristobal. First year, not good. Second, we're losing to Middle Tennessee State first and second year. We're not doing good. Then third year, you finally see the team coming along, and now you look what you're seeing. What's our Miami Hurricanes now? O-line, the trenches, everything is built through recruiting, through Miami, and just getting these guys and building the team how he envisioned it. You gotta wait, you gotta see, but you'll see sparks of it. Week was the first season, all that, but don't think you're seeing sparks and the Miami Dolphins are gonna be back after the draft or be back after free agency and all that. No. Or even back after he gives his introductory press conference, whenever that comes. Do not think. Also, of course, what's interesting enough is I'm interested in seeing how big of an influence he has. I'm pretty sure he does have a big influence, of course, on the new head coach because Mike McDaniel got fired 2 days ago. How big of an influence is he gonna have on finding this new head coach? Because Stephen Ross is the one mixed into these John Harbaugh conversations. Him wanting John Harbaugh. Of course, he wanted Jim Harbaugh before John Harbaugh's brother. And he's willing to do anything to get one of these older, experienced, veteran Super Bowl winning head coaches. And he's linked to wanting Harbaugh really bad. And I wonder if I'm pretty sure Jon-Eric will want John Harbaugh, he's one of the top head coaching candidates out there now that he's been fired. But I also want to, who's he going to interview? Is he going to interview, Shula and them? Because he's coming from a LaFleur tree, which I believe comes from the Shanahan tree. So is he going to go with Shula and all of them? See who he interviews. It's going to be interesting. Hopefully, maybe LaFleur gets fired. Lose to the Bears, 7th seed. Hopefully, LaFleur gets fired. He's coming down to Miami with Jon-Eric and Matt LaFleur, baby. That's not going to happen, but I'm just dreaming over here. Let me dream. Other than that, the Miami Dolphins finally signed their leader of the future, their president of the future, someone who hopefully will lead them back to prominence. Hopefully. They haven't shown a pattern of hiring the right dudes in forever. So don't get too hung up on that, but he does give us some audio clips from past interviews and his sayings and his ideology of building a football team does give you hope as a Miami Dolphins fan, as of course, fins up.